You wake up, you go to work, you do your job, you come home, and you have this nagging feeling that despite doing everything right, or at least the things you thought you were supposed to do, you're still falling behind. You're making more money than your parents made at your age. You're more educated. You've got the degree. You've got the job. But somehow the money just doesn't stretch as far. You look at your bank account on payday and it's already been allocated before the paycheck even hits. Rent, utilities, insurance, gas, groceries, and it's gone. And then you get hit with something unexpected. Your car needs a repair. Your kid gets sick. Your roof needs work. And suddenly you're $3,000 at a hole and you're looking at credit cards and you're thinking about how you're going to explain this to your family. You're doing everything right and still drowning. My name's Synth, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, economics, and why people who are doing everything society tells them to do, getting educated, working hard, staying disciplined, are still financially struggling in 2026. It's become almost like an obsession of mine because the gap between what we're being told to expect and what's actually happening is just enormous. There's a disconnect so big that it's almost dangerous. What we're going to talk about today isn't going to make you feel great. I'm not going to give you some bullshit about 5 ways to save money on lattes. This is about understanding the actual structural reasons why average working people are struggling. Because once you understand what's actually happening, you can make better decisions about your own life. You can stop blaming yourself for struggling, and you can start seeing the actual problem. Let's start with something really basic. Wages haven't kept up with inflation. And I know that's not a new observation. Everyone says it. But I don't think people really understand what that actually means in practical terms. In the 1980s, the average worker earns, let's say, $50,000 adjusted for inflation. Today, the average worker earns about $56,000, so it's gone up, but barely. Meanwhile, the cost of living has skyrocketed. Housing costs are up dramatically. Healthcare costs have tripled. Childcare has become absurdly expensive. College costs more than 5 times what it did in the 1980s. Food costs are up. Transportation is up. Everything is up. So you've got wages that have barely budged and costs that have exploded. That's a squeezing effect. The gap between what people make and what things cost has gotten dramatically wider. But here's where it gets really interesting. Wages don't even account for the full story because we're not accounting for how much money is being pulled out of your paycheck before you even see it. Benefits have gotten worse. Employers have shifted more costs onto employees. You used to have a pension. Now you have a 401k that you have to fund yourself and that you have to manage yourself. You used to have healthcare. Now you have to pay higher premiums, higher deductibles. You used to have job security. Now you have a gig economy where employers don't have to provide benefits at all. I knew this guy Robert who worked for the same company for 15 years, made decent money, $75,000 a year, but in the last 5 years of his employment, the company kept shifting healthcare costs onto employees. His deductible went from $2,000 to $5,000. His copays went up. His premium went up. Meanwhile, his salary stayed exactly the same. He wasn't making more money, but his real take-home pay was getting smaller every single year. Then he lost his job during a restructuring, and suddenly he's looking at Cobra Healthcare, which costs $2,000 a month. $2,000. That's a quarter of what he used to make. The safety net that was supposed to be there, basically gone. Let's talk about housing, because this is where it really hits hard. In the 1980s, the average home cost around $90,000, adjusted for inflation. Today, it's over $420,000. That's not 420,000% inflation. That's an actual increase in the base price of housing. A house that would have cost you 5 years of salary now costs you 8, 9, sometimes 10 years of salary. And because housing is so expensive, that's where your money goes. Rent consumes 35, 40, sometimes 50% of people's income. That's before utilities, before anything else. So if you're making $56,000 a year, you're spending $20,000 to $25,000 on rent. That leaves you with $30,000 for everything else. That's literally every other expense you have: food, transportation, insurance, phone, internet, childcare, healthcare, debt repayment. $30,000 for 12 months. That's $2,500 per month for food, transportation, insurance, phone, internet, all of it combined. You can see how tight that is. Childcare is another killer. If you have kids and you're not lucky enough to have family nearby to help, childcare costs are often more than college tuition. I'm not exaggerating. A good daycare for a young kid can easily be $2,000 a month. Some places it's $3,000. So if you've got 2 kids, you're looking at $4,000 to $6,000 per month just for childcare. For a 2-income household making $80,000 combined, that's the majority of one person's salary going straight to childcare. It's almost a wash to even have that second income. Healthcare is another massive piece. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket costs are staggering. I know a family that has insurance, decent insurance, but when their kid broke an arm, the out-of-pocket cost was $8,000. $8,000 after the insurance paid their part. They're still paying that off. So you've got housing consuming 35% of income, healthcare consuming 15%, potentially childcare consuming another 30%. That's 80% of your income before you even eat a meal or put gas in your car. Okay, so you're starting to understand why the money's tight. But here's where it gets even worse. Debt. Student loans have become a permanent fixture of people's financial lives. The average college graduate has about $37,000 in student loan debt. $37,000. That's a mortgage on education. And unlike a mortgage, which buys you a house that hopefully appreciates, student debt is just a payment, year after year after year. And the problem is that people are told, get educated, get a degree, and you'll make more money. That's true. College graduates do make more money on average, but they also have $37,000 in student debt. So the extra money they're making is often going straight to pay back the education that was supposed to give them the extra money. It's circular. I know someone, Jennifer, who graduated with $50,000 in student debt. She's a teacher, which she loves, but teachers don't make a ton of money. She's been paying her student loans for 8 years, and she still owed $34,000. The interest keeps compounding. She pays $900 a month, and it feels like she's not making a dent. But student loans are just the beginning. Add credit card debt, which the average American carries, and you're looking at a lot of people who have no financial breathing room whatsoever. They're living paycheck to paycheck not because they're irresponsible. They're living paycheck to paycheck because their costs are genuinely higher than their income. And here's the thing about debt. It's not just financial, it's psychological. It affects your mental health. It affects your relationships. It affects your willingness to take any kind of risk, to change jobs, to start a business. Debt becomes this anchor that prevents you from ever making any move that might improve your situation. And this is the really cruel part. It's expensive to be poor or broke. If you have money, you can buy things in bulk and save. You can afford the more expensive upfront cost that saves money in the long run. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can't do that. You buy the cheap version of everything, which often breaks or doesn't last, so you have to replace it. That costs more in the long run. If you have money, you have an emergency fund, so when something breaks, you pay cash. If you don't have money, you put it on a credit card at 23% interest. Now you're paying interest on top of whatever the problem was. If you have money, you can afford to live in a decent neighborhood with lower crime and better schools. If you don't have money, you live in an area where everything is more expensive because the local stores charge more, the utilities might be higher, the crime is higher, so insurance is higher. If you have money, you can take advantage of deals, you can buy used, you can negotiate. If you don't have money, you take what you can get when you can get it. There's this concept called the poverty tax, where poor people literally pay more for basic goods and services because they don't have the capital to take advantage of bulk buying or long-term discounts. It's one of the cruelest aspects of being broke. It costs more to be broke. Here's something that really bothers me. Worker productivity has increased dramatically over the last few decades. Computers, software, process improvements. We're all way more productive than workers were in the 1980s. We do more work in less time. But wages haven't increased proportionally. The productivity gains have gone to corporate profits, to shareholders, to executives. Worker wages have been flat. So companies are getting richer while workers are getting relatively poorer. It's almost like there's this unspoken deal that's broken. The old deal was work hard, be productive, and you'll share in that success. But that deal broke down somewhere. Now it's work hard, be productive, and we'll pocket the gains while you stay on a treadmill. And people feel this. They're doing more, working harder, more stressed, and yet they're not getting ahead. They're just treading water. There's also this weird psychological piece where we've been taught to expect a certain lifestyle, and that lifestyle is more expensive than ever. Our parents had houses, but smaller ones. Our parents had cars, but they drove them for 15 years. Our parents had one phone, the one they had at home. They didn't have cable, streaming services, eating out constantly. They didn't have the expectation of traveling internationally. But we've been sold this idea that we should have all of these things, and social media shows us everyone else having these things. So there's this gap between what we actually have and what we think we should have. That gap creates stress. And some of that is legitimate. We do have higher expectations for quality of life because that's improved. But some of it is just marketing. We're being told that we need things we didn't need before. And if we can't afford those things, we feel like we're failing, even though our parents didn't have them either.
So here's the thing I want to be really clear about. This isn't about personal responsibility. This isn't about if you can't afford to live, you're just bad with money. That's not it. What changed is the structural economics. Wages got disconnected from productivity. Corporate profits went up while worker pay stayed flat. The cost of basic necessities, housing, healthcare, education exploded. The safety net got weaker. The expectation of lifetime employment disappeared. The pension system collapsed. These are big systemic changes. Individual people didn't cause them. A person making $56,000 can't individually fix an economy where a basic two-bedroom apartment costs $2,000 a month. So, when you're struggling financially and you feel like you're doing everything right but you're still falling behind, you're not crazy. You're not bad with money. You're experiencing a real structural squeeze that's happening to average people all over the country. You're not alone. You're not failing. You're just living in an economy that's fundamentally changed. So, given all of this, what can you actually do? First, stop blaming yourself. This isn't a personal failing. You're not struggling because you're bad with money. You're struggling because the economics have changed and wages haven't kept up. Second, understand that small optimizations don't fix a big problem. I'm not saying don't optimize. Cut expenses where you can. Find ways to make a little more money. But understand that cutting your coffee budget isn't going to bridge the gap between costs and income. The problem is bigger than individual behavior. Third, look for ways to increase your income. This is the real lever. Not spending less, making more. That could mean switching jobs, freelancing, starting a side business, getting a better education or certification that leads to higher pay. It's not about grinding harder. It's about changing your economic position. Fourth, protect yourself. Make sure you have some kind of emergency fund, even if it's small. Avoid high-interest debt. Build skills that are marketable, because in this economy, the safety net is your own resilience. And fifth, think about what you actually value. Is the house in the nice neighborhood worth the stress? Is the new car worth the payment? Is staying in an expensive city worth the struggle? These aren't moral questions, they're practical ones. Sometimes the answer is yes, but sometimes the answer is no, I'm going to make a different choice that fits my actual income. Here's the harsh truth. Average people are struggling in 2026 because the economy has fundamentally changed in ways that have made it harder for regular workers to get by. It's not because you're lazy or bad with money.
It's because housing costs have exploded, wages have stagnated, the safety net has gotten weaker, and healthcare and education have become absurdly expensive. But understanding that doesn't mean you're helpless. It actually helps because you stop blaming yourself and you start looking at the actual levers you can pull. You can't fix the entire economy, but you can look at your own situation and make choices that work for you. Maybe that means moving to a cheaper area. Maybe it means changing careers. Maybe it means sharing housing with others. Maybe it means adjusting your lifestyle expectations. These aren't fun choices, but they're real choices that you can make. And here's what I think matters most. Don't accept the narrative that you're failing. You're not. You're living in an economy that's changed. That's a fact. Now the question is, what are you going to do about it? What changes can you make in your own life to take control of your financial situation? Because the good news is even in a tough economy, people find ways to build financial security. They do it by being intentional, by making tough choices, by being willing to do things differently than the mainstream expects. And you can too. Thanks for watching, Legends.